Well, this one's been quite a long time in the making. Well, at least quite a long time in the hoping it would come out, and that is the Lunar Remastered Collection for Lunar Silver Star Story and Lunar 2 Eternal Blue. Based on the complete editions, I believe these are based on PlayStation versions. there's an interesting history here, and that's right. Gung Ho Entertainment has published this new version, this new collection here, and there had been some speculation a while ago when a lot of these retro like 16-bit slash early 32-bit like SNES through PS1 era RPGs started to get remasters, re-releases, HD versions, 2D HD, pixel, blah, blah, blah. All these versions were coming out from different companies, sparked upon probably mostly by the stuff that Square Enix was doing. A lot of other publishers and game developers were like, wait, maybe we can do this. Maybe there is a market for, having our retro cool games that, had niche audiences that sort of just were being a little underserved, and now it's sort of in the mainstream again. Well, that's what we've got here. We've got, both versions of the games, mostly the same as far as content is concerned as what we remember, playing back in the PS1 era. Some changes, I'll get into that briefly, but, opening up basically for a brand new generation of people plus classic fans to check out. So I've had the opportunity to, get a review copy. I played it on both the, PC and Xbox. So the code I received was one of those ones where you can sort of play anywhere. So you activated it on Xbox, and then that gave me also access to get the game on PC to play. And I can say this, it plays, on pretty much any PC out there. I have two PCs. One has an Arc A310, which is the the lower end Intel video card. It is a dedicated video card, but it's not always supported by everything. With a Ryzen 3600, so like a 5 or 6 year old CPU, and it worked pretty well. Played it at 1080p on there, and playing it on the main PC in the living room. That wasn't going to be an issue because that is a 12700K. It's not the newest CPU from Intel, but it's a pretty game centric one, and a 3080 Ti, so like it's way overpowered for playing a game like this, and it played at 4K. Interestingly to note that I did encounter some stutters on PC, almost like full on slowdown, where it like would crawl to almost a halt for a second and go back. It happened a few times on both PCs, which have vastly different hardware, and then I saved, I uploaded to the cloud the save file, went back onto my Xbox Series X, and loaded up. No issues in the same areas. So there is some optimization I think that could be done when it comes to maybe future patches for the PC release, because there's so many different pieces of hardware that are contributing to what that could be. There's NVIDIA hardware, there's Intel hardware, there's AMD hardware, the mix and matching of it. But it may be a cause that it could have had a little bit of slowdown. I thought maybe on my PC that had the lower end video card, so that's why I went over to the PC in the living room with the bigger PC with the super beefy video card, and it still had the same trouble. So it's something maybe with Windows overhead again can be patched out. I noticed it a bunch of times, not enough that it was like deterring from my overall experience, but it was noticeable that it was happening where I was getting slowdown. And then playing it on Xbox Series X, and I also did play it on my Series S, and on the Series S, which is the lowest powered device that we have in the house, it had no issues at all. So it's obviously something with the Windows version that just again could use a patch here or there or something maybe for some performance, but it played completely flawlessly on Xbox. That's where I ended up doing most of my review. Now, what is included here? Well, we've got Silver Star Story. This is the complete, basically the complete edition from back in the day. For those of us that remember, and for those that don't, Working Designs originally had the license. They were, if you're new to RPGs or you're maybe a younger generation, they were one of the first companies to do localizations for North America of RPGs that weren't like Square was making some, but not everything that they were making came over here. Sega was good. Sega generally made their own stuff, but other companies, for the most part, JRPGs were just left out. They just didn't come out here because of the work involved, and some were licensed only if they had very little text. Well, Work and Design started on the TurboGrafx doing, I think they did like one of the very first CD-based RPGs to come over here with Cosmic Fantasy 2. And then they moved on to Sega published games, which was, they did some Sega first party, and then they also did Lunar 1 and 2. That was sort of their claim to fame. And then they went on to PlayStation, and this is where we get this translation, or the original version of this was the Silver Star Story Complete and Eternal Blue Complete. And I'll say that from what I can tell and everything that I've seen documented, and from what I remember, because I played the first game, I played Silver Star Story Complete. I borrowed it from a friend around the corner that had it when I was in like the 7th or 8th grade when it was first out. And I didn't play Eternal Blue until I think I rented it a year or two after it came out or on the PlayStation 1. And I think I only got like a few hours in before I had to return it. So I never really played that. But from my memory specifically of the first game, I believe the dialogue is almost identical to what they included, what the original translation was, which was having more of a comedy aspect that gave characters more flair of personality. There was a little more dialogue that was topical. From what I believe, that some of the more controversial changes were removed, because there's a few jokes and things that I remember as a kid that I don't see in this. And I talked to everybody and I experienced everything, so I'm gonna believe that some of it was altered ever so slightly. Maybe they removed the joke, because there was some stuff that was topical, political, maybe a little more risque that probably shouldn't have been included. And I didn't see that here at all. So I think they changed that. They did include a brand new voice cast for this. Like, they re-recorded all the voice lines, re-recorded the songs, because there has been some contention over, rights on that. I know that the Working Designs people at, became Gaijin Works. They, I believe, still retain ownership of the vocal tracks. And to be honest, anybody that's might have complained like, oh, how come they didn't include that? They were great for the time. They were, when nobody else was doing this, or very few people were doing dubs over here, they were good for that. But some of the audio effects that they used for like Null and that, it was there. If you go back and listen to them now, like on YouTube, they're rough. They are very 90s kind of annoying sound effects, and they didn't use professional actors. They used their own people. So, you know what I mean? It just wasn't, it wouldn't have held up, except for like the archival purposes. Might have been nice to be able to switch to that. But having the new cast here, they seem to suit the characters quite well. In fact, I didn't really notice much of a difference, in my head, other than the fact that going back and listening, I was like, oh, wow, some of these old voices were pretty annoying, or, maybe a little more flat. So other than nostalgia purposes, I think that the new voice cast is much better and much more professional. They've gone and revamped the audio. There's a remixed audio, so it sounds better. There is widescreen, full support for that. You can switch between the original version style of the graphics and then the enhanced version, which has some extra particle effects and post-processing to things. It overall looks pretty good. A little soft in some parts, but overall looks pretty good. Sounds pretty good. The controls are tight. It has a launcher that you go and pick the games from. You can pick which versions of the games that you want to play, which is always cool. These are hard games. And by hard, I don't mean hard like Dark Souls-y. I mean hard for people that are more used to what JRPGs have sort of evolved into now with the difficulty settings. It's one difficulty setting. And this is one of those games where the overworld, you do encounter enemies, like you find them within dungeons and that, and you see all the enemies on screen before you touch them, and then you enter battle. So you don't have to worry about on the overworld battling things, which you did, I guess, in previous versions. But when you do this, you level up and you level up bit by bit, and you get better at beating the enemies in the area, but the bosses all scale to the level that you are. So the challenge, no matter what level you get to, the challenge is still going to be there. And the only real advantage to being up at a higher level, outside of, surviving the mobs outside of the bosses, is that you'll earn more spells to use and potentially have earned, extra money by leveling up to then buy better equipment and better items to use within battle. So for instance, basically by the end of the game, you're most of the time going to be leveled to around level 50, 51, and that's when you have almost every single spell. I think there's one spell that one of the characters can learn at like level 54 or 55, but it's mostly inconsequential by then. But basically, you're working your way to get to level 50, because anything above that, again, the bosses are going to scale with you. What's most important is that you have those powerful end game spells that will help you out overall, and then having obviously a larger MP pool is really important. So the higher your MP pool, the better chances you have of surviving without having to use items, and yada yada yada. Now, for the review of the first game, I can say that the pacing is actually probably on both much better than it would have been initially, because one of the quality of life improvements here is the ability to speed up battles. So you go into one of the complaints of the original games were that it felt kind of slow with the grind of beating up enemies, because you select your attacks, you do things, or even having the auto battle turn on, where it was pretty innovative for the time, having it sort of select what was the best option for you to use in each situation. So once you had defeated an enemy, if it determined if an enemy had like an affinity for fire or water and was weak to one or the other, if your character had a move that could affect that, it would pick the appropriate move for you. It was like pretty innovative stuff. You'd still run out of MP a little quickly that way unless you tweaked it, but it was good. But the characters kind of moved slow, the turns moved a little slow, and I basically played most of the game with the fast forward mode on the fastest mode for the battles, and then you would go into the normal speed mode for boss battles, because you're not going to use AI for boss battles. You are going to be strategizing, because the boss battles are pretty hard, and that's a pretty good balance for the game, and it sped the experience up what would have probably been a dozen hours more, maybe even more than that, in the grind. Cut off and gave me a more streamlined game where, yes, there's still grinding, yes, there's still moving around, but it didn't feel tedious whatsoever. And you're able to get through the game in basically, maybe 2/3 of the time that it would have been in the original version, grinding. Also, some of the things that Working Designs had done in their versions in the 90s to make the games more difficult have been reversed. They actually would go into the code of the games, of the Japanese versions, make them harder for the Western releases, because in Japan, rentals were not really a big thing. Same with game returns. They weren't really as big of an issue. Whereas in the West here, like in Canada, we had similar things with EB Games. In the States, they had GameStop, and I think they had EB Games back then too, where they had like a 30-day return policy back then. I remember that. And it was like no questions asked. So a lot of these games that were RPGs, people would buy them, beat them once, and not want to replay them, and then just return them. So they were afraid of, people returning, playing the game, beating it before the 30 days was up. And the same went for rentals. Rentals, like, there in Japan, there is movie rentals, there are certain things, but there's not really been a game rental thing. It's not been a thing there. You can rent CDs and music, which is odd for us in the West, but you can't really rent games the same way. They didn't have like the Blockbuster culture in the States, or in Canada we have Rogers Video. So because of that, with the rentals here, they would make things harder, like for instance forcing you to use currency of some sort to save the game within the game. Forcing you to be, to not save scum, as they call it, saving the game as much as you could. So they wanted to make it so that it was harder to save and that you would lose more, stretching out the game. It was artificially extending the length of the game, which frustrated a lot of people that weren't hardcore fans. All that's gone here. So you can save anywhere. And I mean anywhere, in a dungeon, right before a boss, in a town, anywhere where you can open your menu, you can save. And saving takes like, you don't wait, you just click save, done. There's no real waiting for it to save. It's done. Loading a game, if you die, which you can and probably will die, especially on bosses, or if you're not careful going into battle and you have auto battle on and you maybe enter an area where there's a boss, or not boss, but like there's a mob that's pretty difficult, you could easily die. So you're going to be probably saving on, a rotating schedule of 3 or 4 saves as you go through. and that has made life so much more fun and less stressful when you play this. But it's still, you still have to have a challenge involved here. So it's not like just save scumming is going to help you. But it is nice to know that the stuff that they've done is reversing some of the, I would say, missteps of the previous localizations and releases here in the West. But it's kind of expected that they would do that, being that the last releases here, there's been remakes or versions and stuff released on digital platforms of the original games, or there's been other versions, in quote, of the Silver Star story, at least on portable platforms before. But this is like the first proper HD clean version released on multiple platforms in the West in 25 years, right? So that's kind of expected that they would do that, and I'm happy that they did. Beyond that, it's cool that they've added trophies and achievement supports for it. They seem pretty appropriate. I still haven't gotten everything in Lunar, but in Lunar 2 I got almost everything. I might go back and get the rest. I'd have to probably do a second playthrough to get everything, because there's the bromides to collect. Those are like little photos that are of usually of the women characters, but sometimes the guys for comical effect. You can collect in the game, and you can get trophies and stuff for that. In the first game, they can be equipped as actual like equipable items to like accessories to like boost stats. In the second game, they're just purely for show. Now, in the first game with Lunar, it has the classic anime story. It is, the classic anime RPG is, boy wishes to be the Dragon Master. He idolizes a hero from, a decade or two before that he heard about. And he wants to go on an adventure, and he meets a dragon who's one of the 4 dragons of the world. And they're like, if you want to be the Dragon Master, you got to find the rest. And then things ensue. And what I remember most of this playing it, 25 years ago was, it's hard for me to say 25 years ago, but yeah, 25 years ago when I was playing it, was the overworld was beautiful. It is a fairly linear overworld. Like, you're not really going to go too far off the beaten path. It sort of funnels you in where it wants you to go. But there might be a little oasis here or there you can go to that you can discover. It's a little more simplistic than other RPGs of the era, but it was much more beautiful in the way it was designed. And there's like floating cities. There's certain things like that I remember very distinctly with it. The voice acting and the cutscenes were like a dramatic thing back in the day, especially if you go way back and you played the original version on the Sega CD. It had cutscenes that were sort of an in-game anime cutscene, but these were full motion video versions for the versions that were released on Saturn in Japan and the PlayStation in North America. And this is, pretty, amazing to watch. It's from a bygone era of anime that I miss that art style in particular. There's a fair amount of cutscenes in it. Pretty good overall. Probably about 30 minutes maybe of different cutscenes of voice acting. Don't quote me directly on that, but it's interspersed just enough. And the game is pretty fun. Moving on to Eternal Blue, which again I'd only played a little sample of back in the day, maybe 6-7 hours, which back then was a lot longer because, again, the grind and because of the speed of the game. Here, I was able to play it and really, for the first time, get into it. And it is, I think, in my mind, the better of the two games. I had always heard all the praise and how the game sold better, like Silver Star sold better, and it was always the praise for that game. But I think Eternal Blue, personally, is a better game. There's more cutscenes. More animated cutscenes. They added a lot more CGI, so it's like 3D mixed with 2D traditional cell animation, and it's kind of that cool wonky look that at the time people might have been like, oh, really neat, and then a few years later people would have been like, it looks ugly. And now we're sort of back around on that because games are kind of going for that style. That's sort of what we're getting now with this. I thought it was pretty amazing. There is a better cast of characters, I think, with more interesting things to say and things to do. The world is reshaped a little differently. It takes place 1,000 years later. Certain things return, certain things don't. The lore is expanded upon. There is, I think, a better emphasis on the character development in the second game than in the first game. The first game is very much the traditional traditional JRPG, hero kind of game. This one's more like an anime that has a breathing, living world that would go on for a longer time. As far as the game control mechanics, the second game, I think, has a slightly better menu system. It's a little more intuitive. The battles seem to be a little more balanced. The AI is a little bit better, and the same with the item management. The only difference is the first game, they made some changes to item management for this version, and in Silver Star, I think that it's a little better in how you equip weapons and that. When you go to purchase weapons, it shows you which stats go up and down right on the menu. In Eternal Blue, it doesn't when you're purchasing. You have to just purchase the weapon. You have an arrow going up or an arrow going down, but you don't know what stats change until you purchase it. You can't look at a weapon stats until it's already been purchased. It's too bad that they didn't find a way to change that, but you have to buy them, then go to equip them to see if you want them or not, and then resell them. And if you make a mistake, it's not too bad because it's not like there's a giant variety of weapons that would have stats that are massively different, but it is something to consider. Outside of that, the audio and music is great. It has, one of the more iconic soundtracks of the 90s. It fills you with joy. It's a very upbeat, for the most part, soundtrack, and that's sort of it. Reminds me of 1995, 1996, 1997. Even though it came out like 99, 2000 here originally, it has that mid 90s feel to its anime inspired JRPG. Overall, it's a good package. Hours to beat, it's all going to depend on how you play. I think I put somewhere around 12 to 14 hours in Silver Star, maybe 15, maybe, because it's a shorter story than Eternal Blue. And then I played Eternal Blue, and I was 23 hours, because that game has its main game, and it's not spoiling anything, but it is a game that after the game is over, there is an epilogue that you can do. It prompts you to save, and you can load, and there's more things to do. The first game has very little in terms of side quests or side activities outside of getting soap so that you can go to the hot springs and watch a couple cutscenes. Beyond that, there isn't like a secret dungeon. I'll just tell you that right off the bat. The first game is pretty straightforward. It was very like, hey, we've got this cool world we want to build. We want to have a story we want to tell. That's it. The second game has more secrets to discover and things to do. So as a combined package, I could see why they wanted to do 1 and 2 together. 1 on its own with the quality of life improvements, like speeding up the battles and that. It might have been too short of a game to release, especially at full retail. Not back in the day when that was sort of like the standard, but today it was. Eternal Blue is a little more full. Putting them together, again, I got somewhere in the realm of 40 hours out of it. You might get more, especially if you go back and do everything. And that is a really good value for what you're getting here. Is there anything I would have liked to have seen in here? Maybe I would have liked to have seen some, like they weren't going to carry forward any of the extras from the old previous releases where they had the big bundles and the box sets and everything. But because, it was a different company and it's all different produced items. But I would have liked to have seen maybe, not just 1 and 2, maybe have the bonuses, maybe have some, actually, maybe in the future, what I would like to see them put out is if they do another collection, maybe do a collection of, Lunar spin-off games or things that were, released on handheld or mobile or Game Boys, that sort of stuff. Previously Gung Ho had put out, and we had reviewed and talked about the Grandia HD collection. Maybe something like, Grandia has spin-off games and stuff too. So maybe in the future, I'd like to see more because, if they have the rights to these, I'd love to see collections with all of the spin-offs and side games of these franchises, because I think this is going to open up a lot of people's eyes to, what the 90s, sort of cream of the crop, good RPGs that weren't from Square Enix, or Square or Enix, were out there, because, Lunar was always seen as one of the top, 4 or 5 RPGs, especially on the PlayStation era. And now for a younger generation, they can totally see what we're all talking about and why, because even to this day, it holds up fantastically well. Little tweaks here and there, maybe to the difficulty, but overall, I think that you could have released this, today as a brand new game. Nobody had ever heard of it, and people would still be saying it's fantastic. And it does hold up quite well to its legacy. So that's going to do it today for this little prototype review episode. And we'll see you guys next time right here on thisweekingeek.net.
At no point in your rambling, incoherent response were you even close to anything that could be considered a rational thought.
Thanks for listening to this episode of This Week in Geek. Hungry for more? Check out our website at thisweekingeek.net. You can subscribe to the podcast, browse our Twitter and Instagram, and leave your thoughts on today's topics. If you'd like to give us some feedback, send us an email at feedback@thisweekingeek.net. Tune in next time, and remember,
lower your shields and surrender your listenership.
We would be honored if you would join us.
Thank you for your cooperation. Good night.